Hani works locally and abroad within companies, universities, and government. She travels all over Africa, Asia, Europe, probably not at the moment, but she has been traveling all over those places, learning about different cultures, speaking about different cultures, customers, and practices, and identifying strategies for addressing the common struggles we all have. We are very grateful for Hani giving her time to us, and I'd like you to join me. We can do a virtual applause to welcome Hani du Toit. Thank you, Hani.
So I'm going to ask you to head to the presentation with me and talk about what it is to be in the state of stress. The first thing for us to recognize before we can even talk about being agile is to understand the neuroscience that our amygdala is in high alert when we're in a state of stress. And when our amygdala is in high alert, it really pumps cortisol and adrenaline into the bloodstream to our limbs to allow us that fight or flight or freeze response, which means that it's taking oxygen and blood away from the brain, making this neocortex, this blue section of the brain, and the prefrontal cortex, the green section of the brain, which are actually your key centers for executive thinking, for problem solving, for decision making, for clear communication. You really have limited access to that. In other words, under stress, you and the people around you have a reduced brain capacity. So if we understand this, we may need to ask the question, well, how on earth do we lead others and be agile under this situation? Well, it is going to be a question of how do we move people out of this space and into something distinct. So I've come up with the idea of agile. Chris referenced ballet dancers. I also think of yoga and Pilates specialists, not that I am an expert at either. But I've come up with what I've called arch practices for leaders to reach for agility. And what I mean by arch practices, I'm sure you need to stretch in order to have anything near the pose in the picture I'm presenting to you here. So what I'd like to ask you to think about is what could those practices be? What could be the regular stretches that allow us as leaders to literally bend over backwards at times of stress? So this acronym is about looking at acknowledging. What is there to acknowledge? How do we reframe? What is compassion in community that's demanded of us at this time? And how do we humanize ourselves and the situation as leaders in order to reach for agility? So I'm going to take them one at a time and talk a little bit through them. And hopefully you have some idea of the thinking and the conversations they are to have post this conversation. So what do I mean by acknowledge? Well, first it's to say, listen, this is where we're at, right? You're here, and we're here in a space of restlessness, frustration, all kinds of emotions you saw earlier on. But what that means is that we need to acknowledge uncertainty and anxiety. It's not just talking about COVID. It's not just talking about the economy. We need to acknowledge that even as leaders, we're experiencing uncertainty and anxiety, and we recognize that our stakeholders are too. So, and this is causing our edginess, our restlessness, our sleeplessness. But we also, as leaders, need to acknowledge that we don't know. We don't know the answers. We don't know exactly what next week's going to look like or next month, let alone the end of the year. So we can't really make promises. We can speculate, we can have plans, and we must communicate with certainty our vision and our commitment. But we can't pretend to know. Let's face it, none of us have done this before. We're all in this from a space of only discovering what's unfolding and trying to navigate it at our best. Now, notice that our distrust increases when people make false promises. So at the beginning, when we were told, you've got 3 weeks of lockdown, and then we're told 2 more weeks, and now we're told, hold on, level 4. And we notice the anxiety and the frustration mount around us because people aren't saying we don't know. People are making what appears to be empty promises. So as leaders, we can't risk feigning certainty. We have to be straight and acknowledge that we're playing it by ear. We're trying to be responsive in real time, and that means that we'll obviously sometimes take 2 steps backwards before we take another step forward. But of course, we also need to acknowledge the positive. And sometimes for your team members and for your teammates and for the people who report to you, that's acknowledging them for showing up. It can be as simple as appreciating as well their unique contributions. And this combination of appreciation and acknowledgement go a long way to down regulating the cortisol levels and allowing people to experience a place of calm, a place of presence from which they can do better thinking. So acknowledge is definitely the first practice in agile leadership, and certainly in the arch. So we've identified that, okay, a lot of people are feeling like this, and maybe it's not you, but maybe it's people in your teams. Certainly for many of the people I'm coaching and organizations in which I'm working, people are still sometimes driving a 10-hour day, sitting on Zoom meetings, responding to troubleshooting, pushing way beyond the number of hours they would have had they been in the office. So how do we reframe and get them from that space of overwhelm to this space of calm, of I can do my thinking, I can pace myself. This reframe that we've been called to at this time really is demanding of us to do some deep work. And the deep work that I recommend is that there's a re-evaluation of our values. So I'm going to ask you to put in the chat box for me in a moment. What do you think is the number one value that people are wanting from businesses that they engage with at the moment? What do they want to see as the primary value? And I'm going to ask you to pop it in the chat box. Chris, as people put items in the chat box, can I ask whether you perhaps can call out for me some of the values you're seeing?
Sure. I mean, right away, we've got trust, we've got empathy, authenticity, honesty and integrity, empathy again, trust again, truth, honesty again, hope, leadership, truth has come up again. Yeah, transparency, empathy, transparency, being ethical, caring, compassion, loyalty, trust, transparency, vision, honesty, trust, accountability.
Thank you. Thank you. Fantastic. Thanks for the participation, guys. Really appreciate you putting it out there, because I think what this is pointing to is the reprioritizing, the reframing of our values and our priorities. And primarily what I want to assert is that trust and empathy and compassion that came up in that over and over, the truth telling that people are wanting is can also be phrased as the public wants to see that we will put people before profit. Now that may be a big one because we're all wanting to survive. But fundamentally, businesses now need to show that they will put people before profit. And this deep work that I said we need to do needs to look at what are the kinds of conversations we need to be having internally that examines, are we possibly needing to reassess even the percentage of productivity that we want to go for, that we want to aim for as we restart businesses again. There may be this idea that we want to push flat out. But if we're in this for the long haul and we're saying that our situation is not going to change for possibly the next 18 months, possibly longer, then how do we maintain that it's a sustainable pace for all our people, for all our stakeholders, that we can consistently provide the value that we're wanting to start out with right now? And given that just like you, people are juggling their personal health and well-being, people are juggling homeschooling their kids, financial constraints. I mean, if I look at my family alone, my son and my daughter have lost their jobs in this last few months. My sister's company, which is a company sustaining 60 odd employees, has become completely redundant. They're in construction. So while the income in my household, there is still income, thank you, but there is, it has shrunken, but there is a bigger pool of support that I need to take to my extended family. And so many of your role players and stakeholders are in a similar position. How do you champion and prioritize well-being, self-care, showing those kinds of concerns. I'm not presenting you with the answers, I'm presenting you with the kinds of conversations that need to be had internally with your stakeholders and your external stakeholders so that you're best placed to respond appropriately. But we're also at a time where that call for compassion is a compassion in community. Now, these are not two words that are commonly business buzzwords. We find that talking about compassion is usually something we talk about, yes, as a community item, or yes, as a CSI project, but not necessarily as a primary leadership quality. But I do assert that this is what the public is wanting from us. This is what your stakeholders are wanting from us. And there's a lovely story that was in the media this weekend that we can actually all draw lesson from. And it's the story of that spa in Durbanville. Maybe you saw the story online, who has been open throughout lockdown because they provide essential services. But with the downgrade in the level of lockdown to level 4, for the first time, their neighboring businesses could open. And so they shut down their stationery aisle and their frozen food section, or their frozen burger section, encouraging their shoppers to go and support the neighboring businesses. Now, this display of conscious leadership shows that they put community first. It wasn't just a tagline, it wasn't just a marketing gimmick. They actually made the closure, they actually made a sacrifice, maybe marginally, of profits in order to show that they're willing to work as a community. This is what people are looking for, and they're looking for it internally as well. Your primary community is your internal community. How do you show compassion for your employees, for your teammates? And it may look to, aside from the Zoom check-ins, because I know most people are doing that, but let's face it, people aren't always as open and vulnerable as they would be in a one-on-one care call. And so leaders need to do more of those check-ins one-to-one, not just to your immediate downline, do it across departments, to people you haven't seen in a long time, who are not in the same team Zoom meetings as you are, to the people who used to serve you your tea, and to the people who you would have seen had you passed by their office going down the corridor. So the kind of compassion that we're expecting is quite widespread. And it includes the bigger conversations in community. At the moment, in our face, because of COVID, are questions around access to healthcare, access to clean water, gender-based violence, questions around inequality in our society. And so people are looking to business to see, how are you responding to this? What is your stand? What actions are you taking to prioritize this degree of compassion in community? So there's a lot of deep thinking that needs to be done on our part as leaders in our responsiveness to the situation as we reach for agility. The last part of this ARCH acronym is, of course, humanize. Now, nothing is more human than this incident of our president fumbling with his mask. And say what you will about him, the fact that he was not just making this fumble publicly, but also willing to laugh at himself publicly afterwards, has really endeared the president to many of his toughest critics. And there's a lesson for us as leaders in this, that our people want to see us as fallible, that they want to see us as willing to err, as willing to share our flaws. And so one of the things we need to ask ourselves is, how are we going to engage those conversations with our people where we share what our own concerns and challenges are and what we're not yet au fait in, given that we're also only discovering what our company can present, who we can be amidst this climate of stress and strain. So look for opportunities to show people that you're as human as they are as a leader, because we tend to make ourselves seem like we've got it handled. And that's not really going to win the day in the current situation that we're in. So I do realize that the ARCH practices that I've suggested may be a stretch given the culture that we're used to. and that it may be it may not be comfortable, but it certainly will allow you to become somebody who's fitter and more able to catch those curveballs as they come at us in this stressful time. So thank you for stretching into this conversation with me, and thank you again, Kate Chamber, for the opportunity to share this with you.